Hello, I'm the Pink Phantom, and this is my podcast. Join me as I delve into the world of games and gaming, and especially old school RPGs. Together, let's voyage into the astral realm and check out my Phantom Thoughts. Once again, I've gotten enough responses to justify another call-in show. So, in this episode, we've got calls from BJ, the Arcane Alienist, Daniel from Bandits Keep, Jason from the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, and Evil Jeff from the Minions and Musings podcast. Links to all their podcasts in the show notes.
Hey, Pink Phantom, it's BJ from the Arcane Analyst. I figured out how to send a message through Spotify for podcasters. Yay, me. Anyway, you're talking about XP. I think that's been some really good discussion. It was good to hear everybody else's input on that. I think one thing I just wanted to point out, and I meant to call in a couple episodes back when you first brought it up, was the concept of milestone leveling, which I think a lot of people confuse. And milestone leveling is exactly what you guys are talking about you get XP for accomplishing a specific mission, a certain goal, or a specific milestone. A lot of people have sort of confused milestone leveling with just, the DM decides to go up to third level, so now you're all third level. That's not what that is. It's not just a function of how long you've been playing. It is tied to specific objectives. You complete a certain task, and that's when you get a certain amount of XP. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Another great episode. Talk to you later.
Well, it's good to hear from you, BJ, and especially good to hear from somebody through Anchor, while the bits and bobs of it are still around. Jason may have to hold off on putting out yet another Anchorpocalypse episode. They're coming for us, though. I think that's a very good point. Yep, milestone leveling, that was a term that I think I was trying to grope for at one point and just couldn't come up with. And yeah, that's a very legit way to do things. If once the characters, decide to go for a plot hook, if you know some of the obstacles already that are in their way, you can assign XP values to that, and they still have the freedom to overcome those obstacles however they wish. But once they overcome them, they get the XP. So yeah, that's a very good part of the game to point out and to talk about, and it's different from the idea, and talking about that, it's different from the idea of just arbitrarily, oh well, let's move on. It's time for you guys to progress, whatever. That's it. That's very different. But milestone leveling, yeah, that's an important concept in gaming, maybe more recent gaming. I mean, you're talking about a 50-year-old hobby at this point, so recent is relative. But thanks so much for calling in. Great to hear from you. And thanks for keeping Anchor alive for just a little bit longer. Oh, and one more thing to add on to that, since BJ sent that message to the Anchor app. I know there's been a lot of talk about how Spotify for podcasters is trying to move people off of even their Spotify podcasters app to something called Riverside to use for recording podcasting and editing podcasting. And I know Jason has put out episodes where he has been testing recording using with Riverside. And pretty much everyone I've heard of it, using it or exploring it, has talked about using it on the web page. I have found a Riverside app, at least for Android, because that's the platform I'm on my phone. It's called Riverside.fm, and it definitely connects to that website, that Riverside website, because I just did a little test of, hey, does this work on my phone? And I was able to find that same file online on the webpage. So there is a phone app for that. Anybody that's looking for it, Riverside.fm, look for that.
Hey, Pink Phantom. Just got to the end of you saying it was basically the end of Muster. I know there's more left in the episode. I may call back again, but I wanted to call in about that. Really great. It's awesome that you did this and went through this. Like I said, I've loved hearing your interpretations of the author. Sometimes I don't agree with the way they say things, but I think that there's a lot of good things in the book, and it's nice to hear different ideas. I did feel like this time, again, there was that moment where they were talking about how new D&D has added this, where all that stuff was in OD&D. Raised Dead, Reincarnation, all that stuff was in OD&D. So they didn't add that. There was also balance in OD&D. So yeah, that wasn't something new added to the game. But forgetting about that part and the fact that they just don't have their history right, the idea that, right, the longer we play a character, the more risk there is to lose them and the harder it is. That's so interesting, right? And this idea that you were talking about where you're right, where people are like, yeah, I just make jokey characters because they die all the time. Is that some kind of a buffer that we give ourselves so that we don't like care enough to really want our character to succeed? That's an interesting way to go. I found that with my players right now, anyways, they are at pretty high levels, and yeah, they definitely, you can see that they are, when something comes up where they might lose their character, you can tell they're not, they don't want that to happen, but yet they're pushing on because they're liking playing the high levels. I wonder if, while these seem like good solutions, like just end the game early, I don't know. I mean, I feel like the solution for me, and the solution that was, I think, implied in the original game, if never done, as they kind of say, was to change the game as you got to different places. That's if you look at OD&D, it really does seem to imply that. Now, does that mean that when people sat down to play it, that they didn't just go, no, I want to play a 20th level wizard and go through dungeons? Of course they did. I mean, that's what happened, right? We can see how people wanted to play the game, and a lot of people didn't want to go, well, I'm going to retire my character, I'm going to go, do domain play. They want to keep getting more and more powerful. So were things added to the game to make that more feasible? I mean, yeah, I would say so. But we definitely know that even in the earliest games that they got to higher levels and that they had characters die and return to stone, then turn back, and all these other things. I mean, this all happened in the game. We get play reports and stuff. So it's not like this is a new thing that people don't want their characters to die. I think that that's always been the thing. I think some people, and what's funny too is, and the jokey thing has also always been a thing, right? So can it be both? Can you be jokey and make jokey characters, but then get more serious with them once they've had some achievement? I think maybe that's what a lot of people do. I mean, that's in my experience. If you play in a campaign where characters do survive, they, again, you have that character. In fact, I won't call out one of my players, but one of his characters has a silly, jokey name, and he is now an 8th level magic user, and he's powerful. And it's like, yeah, you're stuck with that silly name you made because you thought the character might die. So, in some ways, that's funny, right? It's a testament to, he doesn't want that character to die now, even though they have a silly name. So it's just kind of funny. So anyways, it's a game. I think the best part about it is that we can all play in different ways and really enjoy it. And I definitely think there was some really good advice in there about, making sure that we're not belittling people. And if somebody is attached to their character or gets upset in the game, to take that serious because, they're your friends and you don't want to be like making fun of them. And, because sometimes it doesn't seem important to us, but sometimes you got to kind of be better at reading people. And that's just a general life advice thing, I think. So I thought that was pretty good. Anyways, overall, really great. If you talk more about Muster, that's fantastic. If not, I'm obviously going to keep listening for the other things on your show. Been really enjoying it. This is a super long message. I'll talk to you later.
Well, thank you, Daniel, for the kind words, and thank you for a lot of good content there. I agree. It is, easier probably to do the jokey characters if you think you're going to lose them or just not use them again. I mean, look at the characters in my solo campaign. I didn't create them as part of a solo campaign. I created them as a one shot to fight a dragon, and I, thought some of them or all of them would die, and so they all have kind of jokey names. In joke. Some of them are maybe in joke names and not so much aha names, but they're all jokey to an extent. And now I've been playing with them since. Well, I mean, it's been almost a year now because I think that dragon fight was back in March of last year. So, yeah, you never know when the jokey characters are going to survive. And it's funny because in in Muster and some of the, I didn't tackle his stories from his game, in different games he had played in, but one of them he mentions that there's a first level adventure named Vengeance the 11th of a long line of mortality challenged player characters. So, I mean, it's it is inherent somewhat in the game, I think, to do the jokey characters. I think it's inherent in the game to do the characters that are probably recognizable as being uh, Captain Kirk or Legolas or Batman, depending on what you're playing. It's all part of the hobby. I find it, listening to actual plays and stuff. Sometimes, if it's an established, ongoing, long campaign, the jokiness kind of, you know, turns off my interest. But that's not really on the people doing the live play. That's my thing. So yeah, I mean, there's always different ways to take things where you're not necessarily trying to be detached. You're just trying to be funny or silly or what have you. But yeah, I mean, losing a character, especially one if you played for a long time, can be real. Even if you start them off as a jokey character, or if you start them off as very serious and have very serious ideas. And there are, and as far as people retiring characters or they become running a domain or what have you, you're right. That's not the way the mainstream of the hobby went. It went more towards an adventure you are, an adventure you shall be, and most of the versions of D&D third, especially from third edition on, I think, where building a character really became a thing, and so it was kind of put into the system to make them more resilient, particularly maybe more so as they progress. Because I mean, a first level character is still something that one good shot can usually take down. But as they progress, they become more capable and more resilient and more likely to survive. And they're designed more with the idea that they're going to be adventuring to, depending on the version of the game, level 30 or level 20, and gaining powers and abilities as they go. But it is an interesting idea that maybe retiring a character because they're no longer fit for the adventuring style, or retiring a character because you want to try a different style play, or retiring a character because you don't want to lose it because you've invested so much time in it. Those are all interesting concepts within the crux of the game, especially if you're playing an older school style where, I mean, let's face it, those 10th level magic users, they still don't have that many hit points. Thanks for the call, Daniel. It's always good to hear from you.
Hey, Pink Phantom, this is Jason calling about your calling episode. I think it's 85, where Joe called in about the novelist. And honestly, I mean, that's the way I like to prepare. It's what Anthony or Runeslinger of the Casting Shadows podcast calls preparation for imagination, or maybe preparation for improvisation. I think that's it. But the idea that you flesh all that stuff out in your head so you can react to the characters. What you don't do is impose your plot line on the characters, but you set up the whole world, and if you set up your world real enough and understand the motivations and the desires and the goals, then you can improvise off of what the player characters do to react to them, so or anticipate them or whatever. So there's a difference between that and forcing a plot down somebody's throat. But I think that's a great call from Joe. Good stuff. Also, go check out Jules from NZ. In her latest podcast, I forget the number, but latest If I Call You, she has 10 tips to prepare games, and that's to prepare games with a plot line for a set number of sessions. And they're really great tips if you're going to run that kind of game. So check that out.
Hey, just finished episode 86. Congratulations on finishing out Muster, or at least the part of Muster you set out to do. really appreciate your going through it, reading it, and sharing it with us and giving your insights. It was a great series. And like I said, I appreciate your taking time to do that and letting us interject and sharing that with us. So, great job. I look forward to what you do in the future. And I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for the calls and the kind words, Jason. I actually have heard a podcast from Jules from NZ. The name of the episode is "Keep Your Games Tight," and you're right. There's some very good stuff in that episode. I think, especially if you're doing a campaign or you're doing adventure path or something that's supposed to take so many sessions, or you're planning out for so many sessions, and it's an adventure that the players have decided they want to do this adventure path, this series of modules, or what have you. Some really good ideas there for that. So, thank you for bringing that suggestion forward. I think that's definitely something for people to check into. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. That's a good episode to link to. And talking about preparing for campaigns and having an idea of your world in your head so that you can simply respond. You're not having to dig through notes, but it's not at the same time you're trying to enforce a plot line. I think that's very good stuff. It reminds me of something someone told me once. They said that they had a roommate who was in the Treasury Department. That they monitor the money, and they're always on the look for counterfeit money. And they were roommates, and sometimes he would bring home counterfeit bills and show them to him and say, tell me what's wrong with those. And sometimes he spotted it, sometimes he wouldn't, and sometimes he'd go through it, and his roommate would go through him and say, okay, this is what's wrong, and this is what's wrong. And one day he asked him, he said, how do they teach you all this? How do they teach you all these ways of how things are counterfeited and they spot it? And the guy told him that they don't. They don't teach us how to what the counterfeiters are doing. They don't teach us how to spot the counterfeit. They teach us what the real thing looks like. Because if you know what the real thing looks like, then you can spot the counterfeit. And I think that mindset of knowing what the world is and how it runs is more important than having a series of plot points or a lot of big notes or anything like that. You can save those for the statistics when you need to do an interaction or a combat. But just having that good, solid picture in your mind of what the world is and how it runs, that's what can make for a great campaign, because that gives the players space to be creative in the way they approach any obstacle or any goal they have. And then the GM can respond in a way that fits in the world, that fits in the system, and is both off the cuff but also prepared. So I think that's some really great stuff that you're talking about, and that Anthony Runeslinger is talking about. So good stuff. Thank you so much.
Phantom, Zeeble Jeff. Hey, just listening to your latest big old call-in that you had, the very last one, and you're responding to Daniel about sportsmanship and brought up the idea of competition in role-playing games and not having that. Because as you said, who are you competing against? An adversarial GM, or what are you doing? And the first thing in my head was the players are competing against a scenario. And I listened to you for another 30 seconds, and I had to stop and dwell on this, because I think that you can look at role playing as a bit of a competition, especially when you think about early modules, tournament modules that are in the early conventions. Those were competitions. Who did the best at role playing their character, but also how far you got in a scenario. That was some of the goals that you had. So there was competition in there. Now, we don't like to think of it in our home games and so forth, but I still say there's competition against the scenario. Now, this might not track the same way, but in everyday life, you are competing. Well, maybe not everyday life, but there are times that you are competing. And the choices you have made beforehand and the choices you make at the time dictate whether or not you're successful. Okay, follow me on this. You are looking for a new job, and you are one of 3 candidates that are brought in for this job for an interview. And if you look at it on paper, everybody is equal, resume wise, experience wise. Who gets hired? The person that has the best interview. And what is the best interview? Answers the questions the way they need to be answered, or with the right inflection, or not using incorrect words, however you want to look at it. That's a competition there. So there's no adversarial GM in that aspect. Maybe adversarial HR people or adversarial managers. That's a GM, I guess. But if you look at it that way, there is some competition that we have. My kid getting into college, they are going to be competing against other candidates trying to get into college, and what their grades look like and other test scores are going to dictate that. So in my head, I kind of feel that there is a bit of a competition that is going on in role playing, because it is how well can the players emulate their characters to achieve goals against the scenario, against the world that is presented to them. That might be stretching a little bit, but I can see that. Just like in a board game, you are competing many times against other people. That's not going to hold up against role playing, but it's still, you still are interacting with others, interacting with the GM. So, yeah, I know he used the word sportsmanship there, which doesn't quite apply, but I can't quite throw out the idea that there's not a little bit of a competition in role playing. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on it. Thanks for the call-in show there, and let me get back to it.
I think you make some interesting points there, Jeff. I do think that in the most common form of RPGs, what we refer to as the home game, you call it the friendly game, the pickup game, what have you, that there's still not a competition there. There can be success and failure, but I don't think success and failure can is what defines if it's a competition. It defines whether something's difficult to do, whether you have to put forth effort, whether you have to be, have some ingenuity. But the crux to me of competition is there is a a zero state at the end. There's a win and there's a loss, and then it's over. Or I guess the correct order is probably it's over, and there's a win or a loss, and one side won, one side lost, and that's it. There's nothing else after that. And the state of a lot of campaigns, particularly longer term campaigns, is they are essentially eternal. It's taking place in a world. The world continues, the campaign continues, and it's just a matter of can you get the players to show up every week, every 2 weeks, or whatever, to continue to explore that world. But there's not a situation where the GM won, the players lost. If your character dies, you roll up another character and you keep adventuring. But the scenarios that you talk about, those are most definitely competitions because it is zero sum. Somebody gets the job, right? And the other people don't. Some people get into the college that they want, and other people didn't get into the college that they want because there's only so many slots. And the early tournament modules, where there was a scoring system, and the GMs had to score them. And the people who scored highest moved on and played in a scenario the next day or later on in the or if they were if it was a one scenario situation or final scenario, maybe there were some sort of prizes that were given out. So those are all zero sum games. Everybody can't, walk away with the prize. Whereas in our home game, you had fun, so everybody walked away with a prize, or the scenario or the campaign continued, so you get to come back and game next week. So everybody got the prize. So I see exactly what you're saying, and I think those are some good points that I was not thinking about when I made my statement. I was thinking more about the home game, where unless you're engaging in frequent player versus player, or you have a very seriously, the GM is going to kill us, or we're going to survive and succeed at the end of the session and get all the gold or magic or kill the dragon or what have you, then that can be a scenario with competition. But I think competition is more than just, to me, that competition is more than just there is something to overcome. There's obstacles. There's pushback on what you're attempting to accomplish. But even if you don't overcome them, if the party doesn't succeed at what it's trying to accomplish, if there's setbacks, there's that doesn't mean they lost, which is what it would mean if it was a competition. I think back of a quote from Captain Picard on Star Trek: The Next Generation, when Data is doubting himself because he's supposed to be this perfect computer and he lost a competition, and Picard looks at him and says, "You can do everything right and still lose. That is not a sign of weakness. That is just life." I don't think that's the exact quote, but that's the sort of the summary of what he said. And I'm too lazy to look it up on the internet and see what the exact quote is. But trying to explain to Data that competition is not emblematic of life. That you can do everything right and not succeed because someone else is better, or there's a circumstance that you couldn't possibly foresee and didn't have a way to overcome it when it happened. So that life is not itself just a competition, and that being perfect and always winning, it can't always be the goal. So that's just what brought to me. But you brought up a lot of points that I didn't think about at all, and I appreciate you calling those in, because those are some very good points and some good things to think about. The opening music of this podcast is Strength of the Titans, and the closing music is Late Night Radio, both by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. Thank you for listening to Phantom Thoughts. I would love to hear your feedback. You don't have to be part of the show. If you want to contact me and let me know, hey, these are for your eyes only, I just wanted to give you thoughts, ideas, response, and it's really for your eyes or ears only, that's absolutely fine. I'd love to hear from you either way. So just let me know when you contact me. Just, I don't want to be part of the show. There are lots of different ways you can contact me. You can send me an email at phantomthoughtspodcast@gmail.com. And that can be a regular email, or you can attach an audio file to it. You can use the message button on my podcast site on podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/phantom thoughts. You can contact me via my Google Voice number, 864-209-1441. You can contact me via SpeakPipe at www.speakpipe.com/phantom thoughts. You can contact me on Discord, The Pink Phantom. All this contact information is listed in the show notes of every episode. And thank you for those who call in. Thank you for those who don't call in. I appreciate you listening and hope you'll listen again next time. Until then, I hope you have a great day.